It all started with an envelope, the kind you'd expect for a wedding or an anniversary. But this one was different. The edges were frayed, as if gnawed by time, and the ink bled into the parchment like veins. It arrived unceremoniously at my door, resting on the threshold as though someone had carefully placed it there. The handwriting was ornate, looping letters that spelled my name in a way that sent a shiver down my spine. Elliot Harker. I turned it over in my hands, the paper damp and cold, despite the warm evening air. The seal was an intricate design of a skeletal tree, its branches twisting unnaturally, forming a crescent moon at its base. Against my better judgment, I broke the seal. Inside was an invitation, written in the same haunting script. You are cordially invited to a night of revelry and mystery. The Manor awaits. Midnight. Come alone. There was no signature, no address. But somehow, I knew where it wanted me to go. Everyone in the small grey town of Black Hollow knew the manor. Perched on the edge of the cliffs, it was the subject of whispered tales passed between weary townsfolk. It was said to be cursed, a place of strange lights and fleeting shadows. Nobody dared to venture near it after dark. Yet here I was, holding an invitation to step inside. I shoved the letter into my pocket and laughed nervously. Probably some stupid prank, I muttered to myself. But the weight of the paper seemed heavier than it should have been, as though it carried something more than ink. By 11:30 p.m., I found myself walking the craggy path toward the manor. The air grew colder with each step. The warmth of summer swallowed by an unnatural chill. My flashlight flickered, its beam barely cutting through the mist that clung to the ground like an eager predator. The silhouette of the manor emerged, its towering spires reaching into the black sky like claws. As I approached the gate, it creaked open on its own, the sound echoing into the emptiness. A faint melody floated through the air, distant ghostly music. The windows of the house flickered with dim light, shadows dancing behind the curtains. My heart thundered in my chest. Everything in me streamed to turn back, but an unexplainable pull kept me moving forward. I hesitated at the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the knocker. It was shaped like a skeletal hand, its bony fingers curled into a menacing grip. Before I could summon the courage to use it, the door creaked open, revealing an empty hall bathed in the eerie glow of flickering candelabras. The music grew louder, and I stepped inside. The sound of the door slamming shut behind me, like the final punctuation on my fate. "Welcome," a voice whispered, though I saw no one. It came from everywhere and nowhere, sending a chill through my spine. My invitation slipped from my pocket and floated gently to the floor, as if the house itself had been expecting me. The silence in the manor pressed against my ears like a heavy, suffocating blanket. My eyes darted around the grand hall, taking in the ornate but decayed decor. The walls were lined with portraits, each depicting figures dressed in outdated finery, their eyes eerily lifelike, following me as I moved. The chandelier above swayed gently, though there was no draught, casting flickering patterns of light across the cracked marble floor. The ghostly music led me deeper into the house. Each step I took echoed loudly, though the floor beneath me seemed unnaturally soft, like walking on damp earth instead of polished stone. The scent of something faintly metallic lingered in the air, mixing with the musty aroma of rotting wood and mildew. I stopped at the entrance to a grand ballroom, my breath catching in my throat. The room was alive with movement. Figures twirled and swayed in an elaborate dance, dressed in formal wear from centuries past. But their appearances were wrong. Their skin was pallid and translucent, their eyes dark voids that seemed to drink in the light. They moved in eerie unison, gliding across the floor as though their feet never touched the ground. "Mr. Harker," a voice purred behind me, low and velvety. I turned sharply, nearly losing my balance. A tall figure stood there, dressed in a sleek black suit. His face was pale, almost unnaturally smooth, as though carved from alabaster, and his eyes glowed faintly red. He smiled, revealing teeth that were unnervingly sharp. "You've arrived just in time," he said, gesturing toward the ballroom. "The revelry is at its height." I think there's been a mistake," I stammered, taking a step back. "I didn't mean to—" "Nonsense," he interrupted, his voice silken but firm. "The invitation was meant for you. Every guest here is chosen with care." I glanced back into the ballroom. The dancers had stopped, their heads all turning toward me in one synchronized motion. The voids where their eyes should have been felt like they were drilling into my soul. "I don't belong here," I muttered, my voice barely audible. "But you do," the man replied, stepping closer. "Every guest brings something unique to the manor. A piece of themselves." His smile widened, and the air around me seemed to grow heavier. A sharp clang rang out, drawing my attention to the far end of the ballroom. A massive grandfather clock stood there, its hands spinning wildly. Midnight struck, and the room erupted into chaos. The dancers let out piercing shrieks, their bodies contorting grotesquely as they turned toward me. Their forms began to melt, shadows spilling from their mouths and eyes like ink, slithering across the floor in tendrils that reached for my feet. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering in my chest. The man in the black suit didn't move, his glowing eyes fixed on me with an almost amused expression. "Run if you like," he said softly. "The manor loves a good chase." I bolted, ignoring the searing pain in my chest as I sprinted down a hallway that seemed to stretch endlessly. The shadows followed, crawling along the walls and ceiling, their whispers filling the air with promises of torment. Doors lined the corridor, each one slamming shut as I passed, leaving no escape. Just as I felt the shadows nip at my heels, I saw a faint light ahead. Desperation propelled me forward, and I dove through the final doorway, slamming it shut behind me. My back pressed against the cold wood as I gasped for air, the whispers fading to silence. When I opened my eyes, I found myself in a small room with no exits. The walls were lined with mirrors, each reflecting not my image, but twisted versions of myself, staring back with malevolent grins. The room seemed alive, pulsing with an unnatural energy that made my skin crawl. The mirrors lining the walls flickered faintly, the reflections inside them writhing them like something trapped beneath a thin layer of glass. I stepped cautiously forward, my breath misting the air, though the room was unnervingly warm. Each mirror showed a version of me, but none of them were right. One reflection had hollow eyes leaking black tears. Another grinned with jagged, bloody teeth. A third sat crouched in the corner of its frame, whispering words I couldn't hear. I pressed my hands over my ears, willing the horrifying images to vanish, but they only grew more vivid. "This is madness," I muttered under my breath, my voice trembling. "No," a voice echoed from the mirrors. "This is truth." I froze, my blood turning to ice. The voice wasn't mine, though it came from the mouths of every reflection. They moved in unison, their dark eyes locking onto me. "You've always hidden from it, Elliot," the reflections hissed. "But the Manor sees, the Manor knows." "I don't know what you're talking about," I shouted, spinning around to face the nearest mirror. My reflection mimicked my movements, but its expression twisted into a sneer. "Don't you?" it replied, stepping closer to the glass, as if it could step through. "You've been running for years, from your mistakes, from yourself." The memories hit me like a blow to the chest. The job I lost because of my pride. The friendships I destroyed with my selfishness. The accident I'd caused but never confessed to. An innocent life taken because I'd been careless. "No," I whispered, stumbling backward. "I didn't mean for any of it. But you did nothing to stop it." The reflections taunted, their voices rising in a mocking chorus. "And now, you've come here. The Manor has called you to pay your price." The room began to shift, the walls stretching impossibly high as the mirrors rippled like water. Shadows poured out of the glass, pooling around my feet and climbing up my legs. I struggled, but the darkness held me in place, its grip icy and relentless. "Let me go!" I screamed, thrashing against the encroaching shadows. "Let you go?" one of the reflections mocked. "You've already let yourself go, Elliot, piece by piece, and now we'll take what's left." The mirrors began to crack, splintering outward like spider webs. From the fractures, skeletal hands emerged, clawing at the edges. My heart pounded in my chest as I fought to free myself, the shadows dragging me closer to the nearest mirror. "Please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "I can change. I'll do better. I'll fix it." The reflections laughed, a cold, hollow sound. This is not a place for redemption. This is a place for reckoning. With a deafening shatter, the nearest mirror exploded, and I was pulled into the void beyond. Darkness swallowed me whole. The sound of laughter and my own screams echoing into the abyss. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the room. I stood in a desolate and endless landscape, the manor looming in the distance. It had grown larger, its spires piercing the sky like jagged teeth. And behind me, the sound of footsteps echoed, slow and deliberate. "Elliot," a familiar voice called, low and menacing. "The party isn't over yet." The footsteps behind me grew louder, each one striking the earth like a death knell. I turned slowly, dread coursing through my veins like poison. It was him. The man in the black suit, his alabaster face illuminated by an eerie, sourceless light. But he wasn't alone. Behind him trailed the dancers from the ballroom, their twisted, shadowy forms gliding over the ground like smoke. "Did you think you could run, Elliot?" the man said, his voice like velvet over a blade. "The manor is not so easily escaped." "What do you want from me?" I shouted, backing away. The desolate landscape stretched endlessly, the horizon a smear of darkness. "Only what you owe," he replied, his eyes glowing faintly crimson. "The invitation was not random. The manor calls those who have debts to pay. And you, Elliot, have racked up quite the account." The dancers encircled me, their hollow eyes fixed on my trembling form. They began to hum a haunting melody, their disjointed voices forming a chorus that made my skin crawl. "I didn't ask for this," I protested, my voice cracking. "But you accepted," the man said, gesturing toward me. "You came willingly. And now, you will give the manor what it craves, the truth." Shadows erupted from the ground, winding around my body and forcing me to my knees. The earth beneath me felt alive, pulsating with a rhythm that matched the pounding of my heart. The dancers closed in, their twisted faces inches from mine. "What truth?" I cried, struggling against the darkness that bound me. "The truth of your soul," the man said. He leaned down, his face inches from mine. "The truth you've hidden from everyone, even yourself." The ground beneath me split open, revealing a chasm of swirling darkness. Memories poured out. Every mistake, every betrayal, every moment of selfishness. I saw my life laid bare, a string of failures and regrets. The accident I caused played on a loop, the screech of tires and the sickening crunch of metal reverberating through my mind. "Stop!" I screamed, tears streaming down my face. "I can't take it." "You must," the man said coldly. "Only then will the manor decide your fate." The shadows around me tightened, forcing me to confront every agonizing moment. The dancers began to chant, their voices weaving an incantation that filled the air with an oppressive weight. And then, everything stopped. The silence was deafening. The shadows retreated, and I collapsed onto the cold, barren ground, gasping for air. The man in the black suit stood over me, his expression unreadable. "You have seen the truth," he said. "Now, the manor will judge." The dancers froze, their bodies dissolving into wisps of smoke. The ground trembled beneath me, and the manor in the distance began to shimmer and warp. A voice, ancient and resonant, echoed through the void. "Elliot Harker," it boomed. "You have carried your sins like chains, binding yourself to regret and guilt. The weight of your actions cannot be undone, but it can be atoned for." The earth beneath me cracked open again, and I felt myself being pulled toward the chasm. "Please," I begged, "give me a chance to make things right." The voice paused, the air around me heavy with tension. "One chance," it said finally. "But if you fail, your soul belongs to the manor." Before I could respond, the world around me dissolved into darkness. I woke up in my apartment, the invitation still clutched in my hand. The clock on the wall read 6 o'clock a.m. The memory of the manor lingered like a nightmare. But I knew it wasn't over. The shadows in the corners of my room seemed to watch me, a silent reminder of the promise I'd made. The manor had given me a chance. Now, it was up to me to prove that I deserved it.